Hi, I'm Dr. Mike and welcome to NF Geeks. Well, this video is for Shakespeare Week at NF Geeks, and leading us off regarding interpreting the plays, I'm going to talk about Romeo and Juliet. And I'm going to talk about Romeo and Juliet if for no other reason than just to get it out of the way. And I won't have to talk about it later. But actually, my first exposure to Shakespeare was through Romeo and Juliet, as it is with many people. And my feelings about Shakespeare being an NF and why he's such an important NF does come from my first experience of Shakespeare through this play. So let me tell you, I have two very strong memories about my first exposure to Romeo and Juliet. That's very interesting. And I, like most people, I came across Romeo and Juliet my sophomore year of high school. And I went to a Catholic high school that was run by Jesuits and had other religious orders teaching there. And so I was in an English class taught by a nun, Sister Rose. And nuns today are very old and very sweet and very frail, but their reputation is true. They're actually incredibly difficult and frightening sometimes and horrible. And this is one of those times, although it wasn't that bad, I guess, but it was bad for me. We were reading Romeo and Juliet, and we're reading it out loud. I don't know if high schools do this anymore. They probably don't, but this is before the internet and internet projectors and smart boards and all sorts of things that go on in technology in the classroom now. So we're all reading Romeo and Juliet out of our English books. So someone has been assigned the role of Romeo, someone's Juliet, someone's Tybalt, someone's the nurse, you know, whatever. And we're all reading in this really awful tone because people don't want to read. They're embarrassed. They're 15 years old, and they don't know how to read Shakespeare anyway. So it's things like, you know, deny thy father and refuse thy name. You know, sounds like that. Horrible. Wasn't even as good as that. So we're reading Romeo and Juliet, and the reason why I bring up this memory is that I, even at this age, had some sort of easy to understand connection with Shakespeare. It just came naturally for me to understand what this guy was talking about, what these plays were about. So I got bored real fast listening to these people read. So I read ahead. I remember very clearly we were in the middle of Act 2, somewhere in Act 2, scene 1, scene 2, I don't know. But we're in Act 2. And I read to the end of the act. I just sat in class, and while everyone was reading, I read to the end of the act. Oh, they're going to get married. Okay, something. All right, that's great. You know, I read to the end, and then I stopped. Now, we were seated in alphabetical order, and I was the first seat in the first row on the right. And so the wall is right here, right next to me. And so after I stopped reading, I just kind of turned and leaned against the wall and just kind of spaced out and looked out the window. You know, like I don't know, I was done. I read, and so I was just waiting for it to catch up. So I just kind of got comfortable. And Sister Rose saw me, and of course, automatically, S.J. assumed that this was somehow defiance of the authority of the class or whatever, and screamed at me, brought the reading to this halt, and screamed at me and yelled at me, and in classic sort of NF style and dealing with Catholicism and SJs and whatever, what I did is I turned back around, I sat, and I read, and I looked at the book, and I pretended to read along, and really I just stared at the pages because I was so humiliated and sort of, you know, knocked off my center from this whole event. I just sat there and looked into the book like this, not reading because I had already read up to the end of the act and pretended to read until the class had caught up because I didn't want to get yelled at again. Okay, so that S.J. Nunn, I don't know if she was an S.J. She was a J, though. Certainly, though, she almost sucked the NF Shakespeare life out of me. You know, she didn't, I'm glad. But it's sort of evidence of that it was, you know, how I connected quickly with Shakespeare. And the second memory is around the same time, all the sophomores of my high school went to go see Romeo and Juliet, a performance. And it was an Elizabethan performance, you know, sort of an Elizabethan set, sort of minimal. People dressed up very Renaissance-like, you know, with the tights and the hats and the feathers and all that. You know, it wasn't some sort of interpretive version where everyone's sort of, where it's all taking place in a 1950s diner or something, you know. It was got a standard Romeo and Juliet. And what I remember is how completely enthralled I was with it, and how I just understood it completely. Everything that was going on, even though the language sometimes I would miss. I'm only 15; it would miss me. I still completely sort of intuitively, NF-ly, if you will, understood what was going on in this play at all points. I was enthralled. I was completely I wasn't bored or anything. I was right at the edge of my seat. I paid attention the whole time. I didn't space out. I followed the whole thing. My friends hated it. They were all bored out of their skulls. And keep in mind, this is before phones. What did they do in 1984? Who knows? But I didn't need a phone or anything. I loved it. I completely was enthralled on it. In fact, I had a very vivid memory, and this is relevant to the main thing I want to talk about today. When Mercutio dies, the players, Tybalt and Romeo and Mercutio, are all sort of on top of each other, sort of huddled together, and then they separate slowly. Romeo walking behind Mercutio, Tybalt walking in front of him, but facing him, walking backwards. And Romeo walks away, and Tybalt walks away, and he walks away like this with his sword, and implying that he had stabbed him. And Mercutio sort of standing there, sort of in this crucifix position as they both separate, and then he gives his lines, and and he dies, and that has always stuck with me. And so the point of those memories is to start off with Romeo and Juliet is one thing is to show how one NF can reveal their NF-ness. Reveal to an NF their own NF-ness. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that through Shakespeare, I sort of came into touch with my own NF self. I didn't know that then. I know that now, looking back, but I didn't know that then. But certainly that is what was happening. And it also is one of the reasons personally why I think Shakespeare is an NF, because it's just very easy for me to get into his world and into his mind, into what's going on in these plays. I'm never lost in them. I thought maybe now, because I hadn't seen a few in a while, watching them this time around, I would have to sort of go back to the notes and think, no, went right through. But it was very just sort of, it just comes naturally for me to get into his world and really kind of understand it and get into sort of a dialogue in my head about it. And when I read NT writers, that doesn't happen. Abstractly, I can get it because I have very strong, extroverted intuition, and I can think abstractly very well. And so I can understand Hegel or Marx or Heidegger, but it's not easy. It doesn't flow. I have to focus, and if I'm not focused, I won't do it. It'll just be I'll just oh God, it's taking up too much emotional energy. I'm bored. It's too hard. I have to. If I'm driven and I'm focused, I can do it. But I need to be driven and focused. Otherwise, it's hard. But Shakespeare just naturally flows. I feel like I'm naturally communicating with my own consciousness, and I do believe I am. I am sort of connecting with my own collective consciousness of NF, and it becomes very easy. And that's one of the reasons why I do think Shakespeare is an NF, for that reason. It was just very easy for me to connect with him. So let's talk about Romeo and Juliet then. One of the things that's of interest for me in Romeo and Juliet is what is this tragedy about? Because it is an NF tragedy, if there is such a thing. And the tragic element of Romeo and Juliet is not love. Okay, people think Romeo and Juliet's about love. Romeo and Juliet's not about love. Romeo and Juliet is about passion, and that's the tragic element, is that people's passions are out of control. And because their passions are out of control, they're not thinking clearly, and they're not thinking 10 steps ahead, and they're all sort of stuck in the moment in their passion and their emotion, and they're making all these terrible, terrible choices. Now, the passion is related to their ideals. They have, various characters have these ideals that they're very passionate about. And the mistake is that there's something wrong with the ideals, and there's nothing wrong with the ideals. What's wrong is the passion, and the passion is screwing up the realization of the ideals, or the ideals being realized the way people want them to be, because the passion is too out of control. There certainly are not any NTs in Romeo and Juliet. Maybe the prince, is running the town, but he's not around a lot. Certainly none of the main characters of the supporting cast are any NTs, I think. And they're, because there's no dispassionate foresight, which an NT would bring to the situation. There's no dispassionate foresight. Everything is very, very passionate, and there is no foresight. And, seeing into the future is all sort of garbled and made crazy through people's unbridled passions. And it's not just Romeo and Juliet, too. The whole cast is trapped within their own passions. And that's the main problem. And people don't realize, for example, how quickly in time Romeo and Juliet takes place. Romeo and Juliet takes place over 4 days. Really, it's like 3.5 days, because the last, Act 5 is early in the morning before sunrise. So we'll say 4. It's the sort of the 4th day. But in 4 days, Romeo meets Juliet. They kiss. the balcony scene. They get married. They have sex. Romeo commits, no, not one, two murders. Okay, and then they killed themselves. Okay, there's the suicides. So that's very passion driven. Everything is it's their passion that's leading them down this thing. Romeo says it's fortune and the fates. It's not. It's his uncontrolled passion here, and there's nobody to help him control it. See, that's why they could have used an NT around there, because other people are also acting out of passion. Tybalt is acting out of passion. His passion for his loyalty to the Capulets and his hatred of the Montagues. And wanting to one up them and wanting to better them all the time. His passion is running crazy. The Capulets' passions are running crazy. The father wants to marry Juliet off to Paris right away. Paris, a person, not the city, wants to marry him off right away because of what's going on with the Montagues. He's trying to make a power play, and he's not thinking clearly. This girl's 14. Juliet's mother flips out when she finds out Tybalt's dead. She's calling for murder and is, losing her mind. Everyone's, off the rails with passion, and that's why everything unravels, not the ideals. Now that leads us to Mercutio, and this is fascinating because this time around, Mercutio as a character really sort of hit me in terms of my NF-ness, because I realized that this is why I think Shakespeare is an NF now, is because he gave voice and a character to a part of NF coping mechanisms. One thing NFs do is that NFs attempt to be dispassionate and have foresight and try to be like the NTs. And of course we fail, as every NT will tell you. And what actually we end up being, we don't end up being dispassionate. What we end up being is cynical. And this is because what we do is, in order to deflate the passion that is overwhelming us and making our lives crazy, we deny our own ideals. This is what NFs do. If you listen to NFs get into this place where they do this, where the ideals, where we just have to accept that ideals are crap, or they're not real, and that the world is just dissatisfied and state, and that you never really can be happy, and that and love is just a dream, and and who really has love, and NFs go into this place denying their own ideals in order to not be overwhelmed and crushed and hurt by their own passions. Okay, and what Shakespeare has done is he has given that part of him, and all the NFs have this. I have it. All the NFs have this. He's given this part of himself a voice and a character and dialogue. He actually personified it into the play. Okay, and that also makes me think that Shakespeare is an INFP because it's so strong and so clear. Mercutio's role as being that NF cynic is so strong in the play that makes me think he's an INFP, because INFPs are the ones that have this the strongest. They don't express it the strongest sometimes. That usually is the ENFJ. But all the NFs do this. But the INFP is the one that will go away and really get into this place about, how ideals are false and they're not real, and you just have to sort of gear up for that reality and just sort of, take life as it is, and just be very sort of cynical about their own NF ideals. They go to a place because they'll come back and say, I've been thinking. And they'll go on this sort of speech about it. I have that inner Mercutio too, but I have to be reacting to something I find. I have to, I'll be my happy-go-lucky ENFP self, and then I'll encounter something, and I'll be like, oh, there is no love in the world. But if I don't encounter that thing, my Mercutio will remain silent. But an INFP will sort of go into a place and really, really put a lot of thought into it, and then come out with it. I had a brief interaction with a former partner, relationship a year ago, and she was messaging me her inner Mercutio. She was messaging me how she had sort of read this book and was thinking about how life is sort of very dissatisfying, and you have to just realize that you can't have this happiness and all this, and she had really sort of attached herself to this book. Now she's an INFP, and so I wrote back, foolishly, I guess. I wrote back, you don't really believe that. Because INFPs don't really believe that. This is a defense mechanism. Mercutio, the voice of Mercutio is a defense mechanism to block them from their own ideals and their own pain of their own passion. But nobody has ideals and passions like an INFP. That's why they're the strongest with this Mercutio voice. So I said that back to her. She was very unhappy with me and did not say nice things. She didn't say evil things, but she didn't say nice things back. That's okay. She's an INFP. I know I'm right. But it shows that it reminds me how strong that is inside of the INFP. So that makes me think that Shakespeare is an INFP, because his inner Mercutio is so strong that it became the outer Mercutio, became the real Mercutio, became a character with dialogue and cynicism about love. He has this whole thing about this fairies who dreams and how love is just a dream and not real and all this. He's trying to explain this to Romeo. But the great mistake, and this is what also happens with Mercutio, is that it's a denial of ideal, but the passion is still there, because in the end, the NF really does believe in ideals or whatever. And Mercutio's passions come out because he wants to fight Tybalt. Romeo doesn't, because Romeo is now, when Romeo gets secretly married, he's now Tybalt's first cousin, and he wants to sort of embrace family and not be at war with Tybalt. But Mercutio sees it as, Romeo's being a pussy, basically, and and he gets into this fight, which ends up in his death. But Mercutio's passions get the better of him. And what's interesting too is that sort of coping mechanism to block passion, symbolized in Mercutio. When Mercutio finally dies, that's when the passion ratchets up big time in Romeo and Juliet, because Romeo goes off the chains and kills Tybalt, and and things really begin to spiral out of control after that, because whatever valve Mercutio was providing as that coping mechanism does inside the NF, once it was gone, it's gone. So Mercutio, in review, Mercutio is the personification of that inner NF cynicism, of the denial of ideals in an attempt to deflate passion that is hurting us. And it's so articulate and does this so well. The character does this so well, that makes me think Shakespeare himself is an INFP, because he put so much thought into it, the way an INFP does put thought into that part of themselves, like none of the other NFs do. We all do, but they do it the most. So that really made me connect with Shakespeare being an NF and being an NF myself. Now the next thing that happened right after that, when Mercutio dies and Romeo is about to kill Tybalt, Romeo goes on this rant about how love and being in love with Juliet has made him effeminate. And that's why he was sort of... Because when Mercutio and Tybalt are fighting, Romeo's trying to break them up, because, again, he's in love with Juliet. He's married to Juliet secretly. Tybalt's his cousin. He's sort of loving the whole world at this point. A lover loves the whole world, and he loves his cousin, even though they're enemies. And he's trying to break up the fight. But once Mercutio dies, Romeo's passion goes crazy, and he says that love has made him effeminate, and then he gets all sort of wild and crazy and kills Tybalt, and causes that murder. And that really hit me this time around. I've heard Romeo say this. Actually, hey, I saw Romeo and Juliet when I was 15. But there's something about it this time around that really hit me as an NF. It kind of connected with my NF self. I went, wow, that's sort of an NF male experience, sort of feeling emasculated by your own NF desires for love and romance, and seeing it as a weakness, seeing your own NF desire for romance and soulmate, having as a man and wanting it, seeing it and seeing it as something that's emasculating yourself and maybe keeping you from it. So him saying that really kind of hit me this time around, that it hadn't hit me before in the past. So that was that was very interesting, I have to say. So a few more things about just the little things about Romeo and Juliet. One is that I would like to see a production of Romeo and Juliet where they are played by teenagers, like real teenagers, like young. Juliet's supposed to be 14 years old in Romeo and Juliet. I don't know if you know that, but she's supposed to be 14, and I would like her to be played by a 14-year-old. Really, usually she's played by a young woman, young actress, early 20s, maybe even late teens, and that's good. It gives the youthfulness to the character, but really it should go full-blown youth. I think if we saw these Romeo and Juliet as actual teenagers, we would see how the passion is basically running wild with them, the way it does with teenagers, and you could really see how they ended up getting into a suicide situation. You could really see that. So I would like to see productions where they're a lot younger, as young as you could possibly make them. You're really 14. See her as a girl, and see, then it becomes even more tragic, because you can see how teenagers getting all wrapped up in this. I found that I hated the friar and the nurse. These were two adults. They're supposed to be helping Romeo and Juliet, be on their side and guide them, and instead it's bringing about their doom. Granted, so is the Capulets and the Montagues, but, they're run by their ideals and passions too. You know, the nurse wants to have this special relationship with Juliet, and that, you know, clouds her judgment. At least in the end, she sort of gives good advice, but it's too late by then. And you know, the friar, you know, he has this ideal of ending the great family feud between the two families, but his plan of like fake suicide, what an idiotic plan this is. This is like the plan of a child. He's got a childlike mind, you know. His mind is clouded by passion, you know. So I was hating them. I was watching them. I was like, oh, you're supposed to be helping these kids, you morons. You know. The last thing is, you know, what are the types of Romeo and Juliet? And I think Juliet is probably either an INFP or an INFJ, and I lean towards INFJ because she actually is more. She's actually the wiser of the two. She's just in the less powerful position. She has less choices, you know what I mean? Because, you know, she's basically under her father's house and her father's rule. So she, you know, she's sort of wigging out. But she's wigging out because her choices are very limited. I kind of see her as an INFJ. And Romeo, I think, at first I thought it was an INFP in a lot of his ways. Now you might be saying, well, Mike, they're an INFP and INFJ. Yeah, they die. They die, you know, there you go. But actually, I was thinking this time around, this was before I watched it, I would have said that before this last time I just saw it. But seeing it this time around, I thought to myself that Romeo is an ENFP, possibly. Because what happened to Rosalind? Because this is a little known thing. You have to, you know Romeo and Juliet. But for Act 1, you know, until he runs into Juliet at the party, Romeo is all heartbroken over this girl Rosalind, who you don't see. You know, she's sort of just spoken about who he was in love with, and they broke up or whatever, and they're not going to be together, and he's all bummed out, and he wants to die, and nothing's good, and he's in that NF melancholy place all over this girl Rosalind, and that's why he goes to the party, because he thinks, you know, he crashes the Capulet party because he thinks Rosalind's going to be there, but as soon as he sees Juliet, Rosalind, gone out of his mind, and it made me think, wow, I guess he found something shinier. You know, I mean, he spent all of Act 1, oh, Rosalind, you know, all sort of upset, but as soon as he saw Juliet, boy, nobody ever talked about her again. What happened to poor Rosalind? You know, I honestly dodged this bullet. You know, went with a calm, cool-headed NT, and, you know, lived happily ever after, I guess. So I don't know. Maybe that's evidence of Romeo's ENFP-ness, is that he immediately forgot about Rosalind as soon as he saw shiny Juliet. You know, light through yon window breaks. Right? It is the east. So that's Romeo and Juliet. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to go watch it. I watched on YouTube the BBC collection, and another one I think was also the BBC collection, or from the BBC. Both from the mid 70s and early 80s, two versions of it. Definitely worth seeing. Any other version of the Romeo and Juliet is good. Even you know, Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, not bad. I would recommend it. It's worthy of watching. So watch that. The next video will be Taming of the Shrew. So check that out if you want to get ahead as to what plays we're going to be talking about. And as always, you know, thank you for watching NF Geeks. Come follow NF Geeks on Twitter and Tumblr, and come join the fun on the NF Geeks forum. Don't forget, you can get professionally typed by me. You can join the NF Geeks forum and get into the lottery, the NF Geeks typing lottery, and win a free personality typing. Or for the lowest, cheapest price in town, you can have a consultation online with me and get your personality type. Either way, you can't lose. So participate in that. And as always, it's happening, and it's really happening here this week for Shakespeare Week, and I'm having a lot of fun, and I hope you are too.